Hi, so my name is Jan van der Krabben. I am here for Ancient History Encyclopedia, and I am interviewing the creators of Old World, a new upcoming game by Mohawk Games. And I'm here with Leyla Johnson, the head writer of the game and CEO. And we have Soren Johnson, who is the creative director. Now, I have played Old World, great game, and I'm really enjoying it. So I thought that we should maybe just start with, if you guys could just, in your words, a little bit introduce the game and tell us what it's about.
So, Old World is a game about it's set in the ancient antiquity or classical antiquity in sort of the Mediterranean region. So, going from Persia all the way out to Rome and Carthage in the west. And you can play. You start with it. The real shorthand version of it, if you want to explain to someone, is it's like a little bit like Civ, but you're actually playing a real person. So if you started out as Alexander the Great's father, Philip, right? Like every year, you'll be in your 30s, and Alexander will be like about 12. That's how the game begins. And every year, you get every turn, you get a year older, and then eventually you'll die or get assassinated. As and then Alexander takes over, or not, if something else happens to him. And then things kind of like head out in all sorts of different directions, depending upon, who marries who and who has what kids, and and then obviously all the other things about how the empire develops. So it's kind of a way of taking 4X games and making it much more personal.
I mean, obviously, you already mentioned Civilization, which is a game that you used to be, I believe, the lead designer on Civilization 4. Is that right?
Yeah, I was the co-designer in Civ 3 and lead designer in Civ 4.
I mean, that's how we met originally as well. I remember all those years ago. That was a great DM too. But I was really wondering, apart from Civilization, what kind of influences did you look at to make this game? And what kind of inspired you actually to go down that route?
Sure. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of games have success recently that have focused on people, right? Like Civ's a great game, obviously, but it can be a little abstract. You're playing the same person for 6,000 years, and you never age, and nothing really changes, right? So there's a little bit of a sort of like a static world problem that game kind of had, and that's really a marked contrast to a game like Crusader Kings, which is probably the most important influence. But there are other ones. I mean, kind of to some extent RPGs or games like King of Dragon Pass, but definitely Crusader Kings was a game where it's like you're not playing a nation, you're playing a specific person. And so which includes all the positives and negatives of being an actual person, right? And in our game, right, it really makes a difference if you happen to be a bold leader or a cowardly leader, or you're insane, or you have these different characters in love with you, or you're in a feud with the leader of this other nation. And what happens if you assassinate the leader of another nation? Then suddenly things change, and so the world can be a lot more dynamic than the world where the characters never change, basically.
And in terms of just for our listeners and viewers who may not have played Crusader Kings or a game like that, you say you play a person, but obviously you do play a game for 200 turns, so it's like 200 years. So you don't play one person, right? So how does that work?
Yeah, so basically you're always going to be the leader, whoever that ends up being, right? And so you'll, like in my example, you'll be Philip until Philip dies, and then whoever is the heir, you'll take over that person, right? And the game will continue. If you don't manage your dynasty well and you run out of heirs, the game will actually just end, right? So like the idea is like you're not just playing a nation, you're playing a dynasty. And we're really leaning into the idea that there wasn't kind of the same concept of nations back then. That the nation and the family was very much fused, right? And so we want you to feel that while you're playing.
For our listeners who obviously are interested in history, what kind of historical characters can you encounter in the game?
So the game starts with 7 leaders of 7 civilizations, and we have Philip of Greece, the father of Alexander. We wanted to start with him because it actually did start with him. The way we know Greece today is because of Philip II and not necessarily because of Alexander the Great. Alexander carried the torch that Philip, started on that path, and he just, went and finished it. There are theories he wanted to so he could do this. We have Cyrus of Persia, Cyrus the Great, Cyrus II. He's amazing, and under his rule, Persia was known to be tolerant, and it is reflected in the game. We were able to kind of add that kind of bit of mechanic.
How did you reflect it in the game, if I can ask?
Yeah, we're gonna tell you a little bit later about the event system and how we just kind of add that type of flavor with the event system. And then we have Dido, Elisar, Queen Elisar, the Phoenician princess who went and founded and the conversation is still ongoing whether we should start with Phoenicia if we're stepping back to the previous civilization, because when Carthage was founded, it was an extension of Phoenicia.
Yeah.
And for Babylonia, we have Nebuchadnezzar, and a lot of talk on the social media of how to pronounce his name.
I like your pronunciation.
The way I grew up knowing him, I am from the Middle East, and the way I know Nebuchadnezzar is the way I am saying his name. So some people on social media decided to call him Chad, and some people went with Nebu. So, and he was known to be a lover of the art. And just a lover. The fact that he built the Hanging Gardens for his Persian princess, queen, lover, wife, is very romantic. Though it is contested that it was actually not in Babylonia. So we're going to talk a little bit about history and historical accuracy and mechanizing history. We have Ashurbanipal from Assyria. Is portrayed, or his empire is portrayed to be violent, but actually all civilizations back in the day were quite violent.
I think that's a fair assessment, yeah.
He had the largest library of the day. And we have Hatshepsut of Egypt. She is amazing. I keep just running into more information about her. Though her, they tried to bury her information for the longest time. And I think in the 1980s, the archaeologists, and I send a lot of love to archaeologists, were able to finally solve the puzzle that it's not a male. Actually, this is a female.
She portrayed herself as a male sometimes in art, which gets really interesting, actually. We just actually released a video on great female pharaohs in Egypt. So we just looked through that, and it's a very, very interesting kind of dynamic that was happening there with female pharaohs.
Her knowledge of religion is what kind of helped her pull it off.
Yeah.
And we would like to know how did she make that case? I want to know more. So archaeologists, please. Who am I forgetting? I am forgetting. Oh, Rome. Yes. So this is quite challenging because we start with Romulus, and the debate between myth and truth. So we do take liberties. We do keep some things from Romulus, and we start him off with a stress or tense relationship with his brother.
Do you think it's more about kind of the feeling or the essence of the ancient world that you're trying to recreate, rather than a specific time and a certain point in time or a certain series of events? Or
the old world was very colorful. I think we were just trying to take that color and information and put it out there and marry it to amazing mechanics and design. sitting right here, right here, and see what we can do with it. There's a lot of history in Old World. I'll let Soren handle that part of the question.
Yeah, it's tough if you really try to make it. I wouldn't necessarily say accurate, because I wouldn't. So the natural comparison here would be the Paradox games, right? And they're not necessarily accurate, but they're trying to make it look like the real world, right? Like they're not, the default way of playing is not on a random map. I mean, they don't really even provide random maps, though I think you maybe get them through modding. But like that's not necessarily the point. Like you're trying to kind of have like an alternate history that's still on Earth. So we're kind of more like a fantasy version of history, right? Mm-hmm. But it is very rich. So that means we're still going to pull in a lot of like, the more little real bits, real little story pieces we bring in, the more kind of like the feel of history comes through. So we give ourselves a lot of freedom, but at the same time, like we want to take advantage of the setting, right? So like a lot of our events, Leyla can talk about this, but a lot of our events come from just all these little stories that we pick up from our reading and our research, and like, oh, this is really interesting. But it's not like if we read this interesting story of like Olympia did this, for Alexander, but that doesn't necessarily mean we do that for Olympia and Alexander. Instead we create some events for any situation that is somewhat similar, right? Where you have a wife who's a schemer who has a son that she wants to put on the throne, and like, okay, so the game can throw that event at you at any time. It just happens to be inspired by this real thing.
I have to say something, Olympias, because I am trying not to portray Olympias as necessarily a schemer, because back in the day, if a man did it, he wasn't scheming. He was a great strategist. Olympias was a great strategist. We saw how history portrayed Olympias. Mm-hmm. We took that and we created it for a schemer, period. And then I created a few events that have to do with a strategic mother trying to push the agenda of her son, which I think back in the day was very smart. Alexander was showing to be extremely brilliant from an early age. He had an amazing education. Talk about top-notch education. Mm-hmm. And she was a strategist. She was phenomenal. We were able to create a series of events just inspired by Olympia. Some of them match a schemer trait, and some of them match a strategist trait. And a love of a mother, basically just, trying to make sure that her son is the heir to the throne.
Right.
I mean, Phillip was married to women. These are the children we're talking about, just those.
Well, I mean, I can clearly hear how there's a lot of love for history that went into the game to try to bring it to life. Now, for somebody who hasn't played your game, and maybe who hasn't played an event-based game like Crusader Kings or King of Dragon Pass or Total War to some extent, can you explain a little bit about how events work in the game and how they influence the game?
Sure. So we have a very powerful event system that we've been, working hard on the last few years, where currently we're closing in on probably about 2,000 events in the game right now, and it's just something we're going to keep adding to, as we continue development. But the idea for each event is, we have an idea of like, okay, here's this story we want to tell, or this decision that a ruler might need to make, and so how do we sort of like abstract it out so it might fit this current situation. So like if you have an old king who doesn't have any heirs, maybe in this situation, like each of the noble families in your realm come forward and they each suggest someone for the leader to adopt, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's one potential event, right? And so what that event looks like internally is it's like, okay, it looks at the leader. Is the leader older than this? Does the leader have no heirs? Then it randomly grabs a couple of families and then looks for characters within those families that are of a certain age, and then it presents you with that event, right? And so then you can also have things where you might have an event come up that gives you a couple choices, and some of the options might be available whether you're greedy or not.
So we usually have the voice of the vizier, who's approaching you, your counselor, or someone who's coming in to give you news and get your take on it. And then you have options like, hey, we found out that your wife is kind of being a little bit is seen with the head architect, and this is starting, gossip. It could be just really something personal like this, or it could be, the Assyrians send their ambassador to Babylonia, and they seem to be doing an alliance. And how would you react to it? And I try to put myself in the shoes of the ruler. Like, we can build on strategy or propaganda, or we can interfere in that alliance because it hurts us. Or, you know what? I don't care. We can be as petty as Henry VIII sometimes, giving an option of, I am the best of the best and no one can criticize me, cut his head off.
You mentioned traits. You said if you're brave, if you're greedy, if you're mourning. Could you explain a little bit to a player who may not be familiar with this? How does it work? Is it about what the player does, or is it something the game determines for you, whether your monarch is greedy or whatever?
Sure. It depends, right? This is something we kind of figured out as we were just developing the event system, right? Like, what's the right number of events? So it's actually one of the bits of feedback we got real early during the early access phase is people are like, we like these events, but there's just simply too many of them, right? And so we kind of decided, okay, we're not going to have a bunch of events where you decide, whether your son or your cousin or your great nephew becomes greedy or brave or intelligent or something. It's just too much. So once you become a leader, then the event system kind of takes over. At that point, probably most of the traits you're going to get are going to be based off of decisions you make in the game, and we think that's really appropriate. But at the same time, there's more of kind of like the Cyrus King style system going on for the other characters in the game. Well, they'll suddenly start going up or down in the different ratings, right? Which is courage, charisma, discipline, and wisdom.
One thing that I found is that compared to, say, Civilization, at least the more recent Civilization games, the game is a lot more militaristic. There's a lot more fighting going on, probably to reflect the realities of the ancient world, I would assume. Can you talk a little bit about how the combat works in the game and your empire building and expansion and wars and all of that? Sure.
So yeah, we kind of felt like we wanted a game where there would be a good tension between the classic phrase is guns and butter, but the tension between your military side and your economic side, right? Because I know Civ has talked about that a lot. The Civ people who develop the Civ games talk about it a lot, but in practice, I don't think it's actually nearly as much of a tension as we'd like it to be. Like in the Civ games, if you have workers, there's really no reason not to have your workers doing something all the time. So what we did is, this is probably the most significant gameplay change compared to most 4X games, not just Civ, but probably, as far as I can tell, all other 4X games, is we have what's called the order system, which is that every time you move a unit, and also other actions in the game, like appoint a governor, send your ambassador to make peace with someone else, assassinate a character, so on and so forth, they all cost orders. So that kind of represents basically your administrative power, basically, right? And that means you can move a unit multiple times in a turn if you want, right? You can spend all of your orders to move one unit that turn if you want to, or you can sprinkle orders out however you want. And so what you'll see is, like, once people get into wars, they'll start using all of their orders, moving their military units around, because there'll be always more they'll want to do than they'll be able to. This is also to combat the problem of, in 4X games, since you can move every unit every turn, the more and more units you get, the more stuff there is to do, and the longer the turns take, and at some point it's just more stuff that you want. So having an order system means, like, there's always this kind of constant rate of, this is how much stuff you can do each turn. But like I said, if you have a war, you're spending all your orders on combat, and then suddenly you realize your workers haven't been doing anything for a while. They're just standing in the field, not active, because you're, sort of sacrificing that side of the game. So, there's kind of a real trade-off. But like we don't really, we feel like without that tension, the game becomes a lot less interesting. So there isn't any sort of like pure military or pure economic path, right? Like there's going to be, there's going to be a game about making trade-offs.
One thing I found that through this order system, which obviously also applies to the AI player, to your enemy, the game becomes far less predictable than, say, a game of Civilization, where that catapult over there cannot reach you. Whereas one thing I've noticed in Old World is, you see the front line and you're like, okay, I'm good, I'm gonna win this one. And then you end the turn and suddenly the AI brings in this enormous army from far away that can then completely overwhelm you. And you're like, okay, I didn't plan for that one, So I think that despite it being deterministic, that system actually causes a lot more unforeseen consequences for the player. Very much like the real world, where, in war, you wouldn't, especially at that time, right? You wouldn't know what armies are around. And then suddenly you're like, oh, there's a lot more here than I thought I was going for,
Yeah, and we also made a pretty small but pretty important change in that we kind of like wanted the idea of like attacking should always be fun. So you don't take damage. You take like a tiny, like 1 hit point of damage, like just as like sort of basic attrition. But you can't really lose combat when you're attacking. You're going to lose in the counter attack when they hit you back, right? So it really encourages people to like try things out and be aggressive. And like, we feel like, a game where you want to be attacking games are more fun when you're attacking, when you're doing something, right? There's a lot of 4X games where people figure out various strategies where they're just like, okay, I found these really strong defensive positions, and the AI is just going to keep attacking me, and they're going to keep losing their troops doing it, and like, I don't actually have to think. I can just sit here and let the AI kill itself, right? And so, we wanted to get rid of that.
One of the things I also wanted to talk about with you guys is essentially how you brought that world alive. I think you said something in the very beginning, Leyla. You said the ancient world was very colorful. And that's something that struck me in the game, that the game is very vibrant in its color and its representation of the ancient world.
Well, first of all, the amount of research that goes into every single thing we do is endless. Kind of continuing. We keep finding new things. Like even in the map that we created that's based on the real world back then, we went and found that there's a forest that would not have existed because it was created in 1600s, 1700s by imported trees. And they imported trees and planted them, and that forest was not there. So we went and removed it and renamed it. The Nile River was 2 miles different from where it is today. So when you see the art in Old World, what goes in, first of all, I mean, we have amazing artists. From the in-house artists to the contracting art that we do. If you take a look at the portrait art, there's, of course, I read every bio. That's, that's available for us to read. I definitely miss going to the library, but they're closed currently. So first I read about the character and the type of clothing, the architecture, what they were known for, what their personality could have been like. Like, what is the pose? When you start as Phillip II, how would he pose? And when you are born by a she-wolf and your father is Mars, how do you look like? Romulus. So we try to recreate that type of personality, and we try to create skin tone, features, colors, and what we know, that they have facial hair, that they have injuries, were they part of the military, like Phillip. You can dress them as military. Were they royalty, like Hatshepsut, who declared herself to be male? We wanted her not to be extremely feminine in the sense of like standing and, just being just a female. She wanted to be known as a male pharaoh. And, you can see that in her pose. Dido was known to be defiant. She killed herself just so she won't have to be played as a pawn. So you see her standing with her hands on her, hips. Just, we try to take that pose as a statement of who they were. And I work on the wonder art with an artist in Azerbaijan. His name is Arya Safarzadehgan, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, because we don't talk. He speaks Farsi, and I don't. But we communicate via email, and I think that he either translates it. It works. It's magical. He's phenomenal. So I create the references for him. He creates the wonder arts, and we try to recreate the ziggurat or the Ishtar Gate, and what kind of colors, how would it have looked like back then? His
hanging gardens is amazing.
The hanging gardens. Yeah. So the hanging gardens, we wanted the hanging feel of the gardens. Why were they called that? And we found out that, according to the sources that we found, is that Nebuchadnezzar built them to remind his wife of her home, Persia. And we wanted this like hilly-like, but still a structure. So you can see the greens hanging, cascading. And we wanted some water to be close by. It was every single painting is a story.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I had the feeling that you're really trying to aim for more of a feel than for historical accuracy, not only because obviously we don't really know exactly how these people looked, or nobody has any clue what the Hanging Gardens actually looked like. So your depiction of the Hanging Gardens or the Colossus of Rhodes are quite fanciful, right? Whereas the depiction of the Ishtar Gate, where we actually do know what it looked like, is pretty accurate, I would think.
The word wonder implies wonder. So we're trying to create a structure that is believable, but also super majestic. So we try to exaggerate romantically what something would have looked like. So it would look like a wonder.
So the game right now is in early access, right? You've mentioned it before. For people who are not necessarily familiar with that term, what does that mean?
It basically means that the game is playable enough that we're comfortable releasing it, in a version that people could pay money for, right? But that it's not finished. And, we, are essentially inviting the community to help us develop the game.
Thank you very much for having introduced the game. I hope that everybody who listens might be getting interested. The game is available on the Epic Games Store. Is it on Steam as well?
No, it's just on the Epic Games Store.
Okay, yeah, and it's early access, so that means it is not quite finished yet, but definitely playable and a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks a lot for that.
Well, thank you.